All right, so AI Ethics WorkGroup's interview training, and this is all about face-to-face and Zoom interviewing and the consent process. So at the end of this training, you're going to be able to get proper consent for a research interview. You're going to understand why consent is important. You'll be able to confidently interview a person face-to-face or online, and you'll be able to wrap up your interview file and know where and how to store it. So first of all, let's just go in to look at what are the aims of the GEI's research. And PG, I'm wondering if you'll be able to do what I was going to do and fill in people's thoughts on this. On the slide, the research is aiming to find out, and we want you to tell us, based on what you know, what's it all about? We're looking for the thoughts of who about what? Has anybody got anything that they could say about that? Whose thoughts are we looking for in these research interviews? You can come off mute and give us a shout.
We're looking for thoughts of human beings about AI.
Oh, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, I never thought of that. Any particular type of human being?
Adults?
Probably, mostly, yeah. I think we could probably find ourselves interviewing some older teenagers. Anybody else got a thought?
I think we are aiming to find out people's perception on AI, and look at it from the perspective of their knowledge, getting their knowledge from maybe beginner or maybe intermediate or advanced or professionals, just to assess their perception of AI on across various knowledge grades and category. Yeah.
Right, yeah, good point. So it's a range of different levels of knowledge. I mean, one thing that I think is interesting is I think the GEI overall is trying to research the views of literally anyone, literally could be anyone at all. But in the work group, maybe we will at some point decide we want to have a focus, like particularly more marginalized voices, people who don't get heard as much. Maybe that could be something we would look at, but I think that's up for discussion. And what Clement was saying about what we want to know their views about. Oh, I'm just looking. Oh yeah, Advanced MAO is saying thoughts on ethical AI. That's exactly what I was going to raise. Yeah, I think the focus of the research is aiming to find out what people think about ethics with regard to AI. How should it be developed ethically? And what do they think are the ethical concerns? All right, so PG, if you can. Oh, PG, you've got a hand up. Go on.
Yeah, so I'm in now, Bunny. Do I continue from this point?
All
Then
right,
you can just
are
help
you
me
good to
share.
go? All right,
Yes, you can
let me
just.
stop sharing and you can take over. Yeah.
I actually wanted it to share, then I just flip through. We just flip through together. Is that okay?
Sorry?
I
Didn't
actually
hear.
wanted to share your slides, then we just flip through together because I think I'm not sharing my slides. Did you get that?
Not really, no.
Okay, then let me just share. Okay. Okay. So yeah, so Vani was talking about the research, what the aim of the research is, because we are actually carrying out an interview for a research, right? And I had some people's contributions. So can I just continue from here, Vani?
Yeah, please go on to the next slide. Yeah.
Okay. So basically, like we've heard people, I think I had Clement's comment. So we are basically getting people's thoughts about AI, concerning AI. It's broad of attitudes, right? That's what was written in the research strategy. We just want to know what people think, what are people's concerns, what are people's fears concerning AI, especially focusing on ethical concerns and for future development. I think I heard Bani mention that. But to carry out an interview to get this information from people, right? The first thing that we must get, or the interviewees must know, is that they must give consent, right? So consent is basically permission for something to happen or an agreement to do something, right? That's what consent is. Permission for something to happen or agreement to do something. People cannot give you data that they do not consent to. So probably you could just ask someone a question concerning what the research is about, and then they may spill and keep speaking. If they do not give you consent to use that data or that information, then that should not even be considered as an interview. In case somebody may want to do that, for people to give you information or data for this particular research through the interviews you're going to be carrying out, they have to give you consent. And consent has to be informed. So the slide here says informed consent is a cornerstone of ethical research. Please, I'd love to get feedback to know that I'm being understood and I'm being heard, please.
Yeah,
hearing
you've been
you
heard.
clearly.
Yeah,
Go
yeah,
ahead,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so informed consent is a cornerstone of ethical research. So what does that mean? People need to know what they're giving consent to, right? We want to get information on how you think about AI or what your concerns about ethical use of AI, governance of AI, any of such thing. People need to be informed, right, about what they are giving the consent to, how the data is going to be used, how the data is going to be stored, and how it's going to be processed and all of that. So interviewees need to know what they are giving their data to. In other words, they need to be formed. And I've already said that here. So to give informed consent, right, you need to explain and ensure that interviewees understand who and which organization is doing the research. I hope we already know that, right?
Yeah,
what the
yeah.
research is for.
Yeah.
Please, is it only Clements, right?
Oh, we are here with you.
Yeah. Okay, so they need to know what and which organization is doing the research and what the research is for, which we've already talked about, and who you are. Apparently, we are members of the Singularity Net Ambassadors Program, and what role you're taking, which is just that you're going to be taking information, you're the interviewer, and why they have been invited to be interviewed, where and how their input will be stored, and shared, and especially the fact that their input will be anonymous and confidential. So the interviewees, which is basically the people you're going to be interviewing, right? They need to know what we've just mentioned. They need to know the organization that's doing this research, what the research is for, who you are, why they've been invited, and how their information is going to be stored and shared. Until they understand this, then the consent they are giving may not as well be informed, right? So you have to ask for their consent to do this. You have to also explain that they can withdraw their consent if they later change their mind. In the next slide, we are going to see that we're going to see how we're going to do this, right? You do this by talking to the person in advance. So basically, for the people that are going to be carrying out this interview or for any other kind of interview, your interviewee is supposed to know in advance, ideally supposed to know in advance, explain what we've already talked about, where you're from, who you are, what you're representing, what the research is about, basically. And We also have an information sheet. I think the slides will be shared afterwards. If you click on the copy of the information sheet, it's basically detailing what the research is about and the fact that that interviewees have the right to withdraw consent, right? And I think on the information sheet, there is a space of 14 days for which interviews can call the interviewer and ask for withdrawal. That means they do not want you to use their data. After 14 days, it's been said on the information sheet that the data may be processed. So it is important that the people you're interviewing are clear on this information. They should read the information sheet. If they have questions, they should reach out to you. And there are a couple of persons written down there. I think Vanny's there, Louis there. You could reach out to ask for questions that you may be asked and then you probably do not understand. And also ask them to complete the Google Form sheet, right? There's a Google Form sheet there, and ask them to complete the form. Although ideally, which is the right thing to be done, interviewees can only sign the consent form after they've been interviewed, right? They should sign the consent form after they've been interviewed, so that they know that this is the information they had given out and they are comfortable with the information they have given out. And when you open the Google Form, right, you're going to see the first question is an identifier code, which your interviewees should have. So if you say you're going to interview 10 persons, your identifier code on the form, the first person is going to fill, it's going to be the work group Q3, because a couple of persons are going to do the interview for Q3, right? You're going to do the interview for Q4, then you can write work group Q4, your initials, and the number. Hi, Vanny, please, could you help us paste the link on the comment section? Love you in the comment section.
Yeah, they're both in there already.
Okay. So I don't know if there is any questions from what I've just said. If there is any questions, guys?
Just want to quickly ask Esther if she's still here. She's still here. Yeah, I made a bit.
I lost you. I can't
Yeah,
hear you.
that's
the
you.
work group Q3 as part of the identifier code. I just assumed that. Is that going to work okay?
I think that's probably fine. I'll have a think about it and just make sure that it tracks. But I think yeah, because it identifies when it was done, which is pretty good. So I think if there's an event, then we use the initials of the event. But if they're just general, then yeah, that should work.
Cool.
Okay. Okay. Is there any other question, please? Okay, so I'd move on to the next slide. So now we've talked about, carrying out an interview. We've talked about receiving consents, ensuring that your consent that your interviewee is giving is informed. That means they know where it's coming from, what they're doing, what organization is carrying out the research, and what organization is going to receive this data, and they know who you are. They get to sign at the end of the interview so that they're sure that it's properly informed, or what they've given out is what they want to give out. So we are going to talk about the demographic information as part of the information that both interviewers and interviewees are supposed to get, right? The demographic information basically talks about the location, the gender, educational qualification. So I know Vani was like, she was gonna get, we are yet to decide the projects, we are yet to decide on that, Vani.
Yeah, I mean, the project probably will want to collect some demographic information from both interviewers and interviewees. It might be interesting to people why it's good to collect it from interviewers as well. So several studies have shown that you get different information depending on who the interviewer is, and it just might be useful to be able to track that. For instance, if you're a similar age, a person might say different things to you than if you're loads younger than them or loads older than them, stuff like that. But it's yet to be finalised, and yeah, I think, Esther, we were saying this morning that you might add it to the consent form before people use it, or we might do it some other way. But I guess we just thought it'd be quite interesting while we're all here to just ask if anybody has any thoughts on what would be the most useful demographic info to collect.
Yeah. Yeah. So do we have suggestions on what would be the most useful demographic information to collect? I, for one, from where I am or where I come from, I think the location is quite important and the educational qualification is quite important. And even religion, right? Because I'm from a place where we have more than one religion and we have a lot of tribes. So the location would be important because I do know that location would affect people's perception to if they want AI, what AI is, and fears and concern about AI. So I would want to hear from people from other parts of the world because this is actually supposed to get a global perception about what people think about AI, what AI is, or their concerns and fears and ethical concerns or developmental anticipation or hope concerning AI. So from my own end, I do know that educational qualification is a thing, the location would be a thing, the tribe would be a thing, and cultural beliefs would be a thing. So I don't know. Anybody else?
There's
Anybody?
quite a few things in the chat. I'm copying them into the slide.
Okay. 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 So the next thing we're gonna do is the interview proper. You know, we want to carry out interview. We are getting data from the interviewee. So this interview would majorly be we would be recording the interview as audio, right? There's some interviews that would need you to record it as a video, but this one will mostly be audio. For the interviewers, this will mean using your phone, and then the file formats, ideally we like the WAV as it is lossless, right? So I checked online for some applications that would allow you to record your audio while interviewing as a WAV file. And I know Tapit is part of it, although Esther recommended using Voice Record Pro, but mostly for people who are using the iPhone, that's iOS.
It works on Android as well. There is one for Android.
Okay. So these are basically preparations for recording your interview, right? You should test your phone. Your phone is working a couple of days before. You could do some dress rehearsals. I like doing a lot of dress rehearsals, ensuring that that particular day is going to be efficient enough, making sure you have enough storage in your phone, switching to airplane mode to ensure that the call is not going to be interrupted, because ideally we're supposed to record the audio as a whole without breakage, right? So yeah, switch to airplane mode so you won't be interrupted by call or text. Make sure your phone is fully charged when set off to interviewer, ideally plugged in, so that you do not have battery issues. If you're in Nigeria, you could get a power bank so that you're not disappointed with electricity, right? Setting up your space, you could try to minimize noise. This should be basic, right? Your space should be a place that should minimize noise, should give you calm, private space. If you're using smaller rooms where there could be echo, try to insert some soft furnishing. Keep an eye out for things like that could just cause some noise before that day and all of that. It's basic information. Just try, I think in summary, just try to minimize noise as much as possible, so that the audio quality is going to be clear, and then so we can get the data we need for the research. And also we have some points here for when you are using your phone, because I want to believe a couple of persons are going to use their phone or their iPad. So it's best to keep your phone with your mouthpiece facing the interviewer, right? If you're placing your phone on the table, then you could use something soft to just try to minimize noise and echo, right? And then change your display settings to be as long as possible so you can monitor the recording. That's the display that would show you what exactly is going on the recording application. And then if you have headphones that has a line out, consider using them as another way to monitor the recording. Then I wrote some points out for Zoom interviews that I would also want to get some people's suggestions. If you want to, for people who want to do interview, for people who want to carry out online interviews via Zoom platform, you could just the same thing, try as much as possible to reduce the noise, a serene environment, to reduce distractions and interruptions. Check that your internet connection is strong, whether you're using a wireless or wired connection, right? To avoid breakage. Don't forget to record for upload. So if you're using the Zoom platform, or apparently we would suggest to use the Zoom platform, right? Do not forget to click record and try some dress rehearsals before the main interview, right? And we are also suggesting that you turn off your cameras to preserve data bandwidth. So I also want to ask for suggestions from us, right? Is there anyone here that has carried out an interview via Zoom before? Is there any suggestions you could give us for proper recording that could help with recording? Anybody?
I do think it's nothing special. Maybe you just have to set your Zoom to record mode, and then it gets to save on your hard disks, and probably get to upload it on the drive and then share it.
Okay. Any other person? Okay, we are also preempting that there could be some accessibility needs for interviewees, like maybe providing data for some interviewees for the interview. So if there is anything like that, you could reach out to Vani, right? The persons that were mentioned before now. If you go through the consent form and information sheet, you could reach out to the same persons, right? Other preparations, for me, somebody's hand is up. Gorga.
Yeah, thank you, PG. For the
Yeah.
interview, can I do interview through Discord? Because using Zoom, the time is very limited, and in Discord is not limited, and I can record it using OBS later on Discord.
Okay, well, I'm going to allow Vani speak on that as well. But you know that the time for the interview is not supposed to be unlimited. The time for the interview per person is supposed to be ideally 30 minutes. So we are going to get into, we're going to get into the interview structure proper. But yeah, I'm going to also allow Vani to speak on that, but the interview is not going to be an unlimited time. You're not just supposed to keep speaking. There's supposed to be structure for the interview where you get to get the exact information we need and all of that. So, Vani?
Yeah, nothing else to say really. I mean, Zoom's noise cancelling is considerably better than doing it on Discord. And Zoom allows kind of captions if somebody's first language isn't English. So on the whole, we prefer Zoom, I think. And yeah, as PG said, interviews are probably going to be half an hour in most cases. But also most of this project is actually face-to-face interviews anyway. So yeah.
Okay.
Will we need to be converting the audio files to a WAV file?
Yes, I
Or are
mentioned,
they that way?
yeah, since it's lossless, yes, I mentioned that.
We'll need to convert them to a WAV file. What is the format that they're in currently on Zoom?
Okay. I haven't done a Zoom interview before, but I do know that when you download your recording, you could upload it to certain applications, like I mentioned, Tap It, and then convert it to a WAV file. Right, Vani?
Okay.
Yeah, I think the native file format is MP4, which is not great, but yeah, I guess we can convert them.
Yeah, but
I'm just looking at the time. I think we need to kind of crack on a little bit. I don't want to rush people, but what we are going to do is make a Discord group for everybody who's doing interviews, so we can kind of work through these details in there.
Okay. Okay, so the other preparation, just think about your dressing, right? I brought up the dressing part because where I come from, dressing is a big deal, right? So it also depends on your location. You should know your location, right? And you should know the person you're interviewing. Some people said they're going to be interviewing their friends. So if it's their friends, as much as we would want a form of informality, but we should always remember the context of the interview, right? So basically for dressing, just dress largely dependent on where you come from and you know how it's going to affect the interview. But largely you should dress relaxed. You will get a relaxed interview. Dress formally, you're going to get a formal interview and all of that. Right? If you're nervous, you could basically write down checklist of the things you need to do beforehand, pick things off, do a trial run, dress rehearsal, switch on recording, and just chat a bit until you're relaxed. Take a deep breath and then you should be fine. So we're going to talk about interview ethics, which is basically how an interviewer should behave. So do we please have any suggestions from anyone? How should an interviewer behave? Anybody? Anybody.
Sure. I think an interviewer should be respectful, behave in a relaxed manner, open, kind of facilitate a room where people are comfortable opening up and giving the answers. Sort of creating not a back and forth, but an open forum where they're comfortable giving their information.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Anybody else? Anybody else?
I mean, I can go a little further, explaining everything properly. You know, do you have any questions? Asking along the way, are you still comfortable? Do you not understand anything? Just getting the information in a relaxed way.
Yeah. So basically, so that's correct. Thank you very much. So yeah, respectful, cautious, relaxed, and try not to be arguing with the person you're interviewing, right? Vani's hand. Vani?
Yeah, there was one I just wanted to. I mean, you were just saying don't argue with them. That's absolutely true, but also just don't correct them. If they say something that you know is factually incorrect,
Yeah.
doesn't matter. What we're trying to gather is what they think. And if what they think is incorrect and you know it is, that doesn't matter. The interview is supposed to be capturing their views. So yeah.
Yeah, so yeah. Somebody, okay. Somebody else's hands up. Yeah, so yeah,
Lilu, I thought your hand was up. Wasn't Lilu's hand up?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I wanted to add on to that if somebody does like provide something like something infactual or just something that is just like obviously not correct, you can even have them elaborate on it. Be like, wow, like that is I love your view on this. Could you expand on that more and try to see why they think that way? Because that also helps. And if there is like, some sort of I don't know, like not understanding or just like a miscommunication and understanding what something is.
Yeah. Vani's hands. Vani?
Yeah, totally agree with that, Lulu. Thanks for that. Yeah, I think the whole thing about it's an interview, not a conversation.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, even if they try to get you to give your views, just kind of deflect it, I guess, and keep the focus on what they want, what they have to say. Interviews can be interesting if you do them in a conversational way, but this is not what we're doing here. The other thing I wanted to raise, which is less of a kind of ethical behavior one, and it's just more of an interview technique one. New interviewers have a habit of ahaing over everything. So you've got somebody who's chatting away in mid-float and you're just going, uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. And when you come to listen to it, all you can hear is uh-huh. And it's just really frustrating. So please don't do that. It's an incredibly weird thing to do at first, to just be quiet and listen, but you do get used to it as an interviewer. I can see Guillermo in the chat going, what to do with evasive guests, aggressive guests, when the hits the fan, what to do? Any thoughts?
Okay, for an aggressive person, you are the one choosing your interviewees, right? So you should preempt, you should expect, the person you're trying to interview. So you should expect some kind of reaction, if there is any, and if there would be an aggression. I think it largely depends on you, the interviewer, about your own self-control, about your own comportment. And again, like we said, this is an interview. You're not trying to push a narrative. You're not trying to coerce them to say something. You're trying to listen and receive feedback and receive information and how they perceive or what their concerns or fears are concerning AI. So if there is any situation that may get aggressive, it is just by listening and just getting clarity on what you're trying to say. I'm trying to imagine an aggressive situation and what would lead to an aggressive situation, though, if you're not trying to nudge the person to say something. So, Vani.
Yeah, I just want to sort of raise the fact that if somebody is really aggressive or if they abuse you in some way, you do have the right to end the interview. You always have that right. So, obviously do it civilly and do it kindly, but if it's more than you can handle, you're absolutely okay to do that. However, most of these interviews are being done with people that people know, your mum, your mates,
Yeah.
so it's kind of unlikely to arise. But just in general, you don't have to put your own rights into abeyance at all.
Yeah, Lily's trying to say.
And we have a question in the chat. Gorga wants to know if it's possible to use our language. Can they use a language other than English?
Okay. Then we would have to do some transcription. Vani?
I mean, I think what we've budgeted for at this point is interviews in English. I think we might have to look at that in Q4, but these ones are going to be English based. Esther, Lilu, I don't know if you've got any thoughts about interviews in other languages. I think it's something we'd want to do at some point.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that if two people's native languages are shared and it's different from English, it can get deeper data, but there is an extra layer of interpretation that goes with a translation, or an extra layer where an error can occur in the transcription and interpretation. So definitely it would have to be a high quality translation into English, because that's the language that the knowledge graph will be in ultimately. So so there are those considerations, but I wouldn't see, when there's a bit more funding available, I wouldn't see why it wouldn't be possible later down the line.
Okay. Any other question, please?
I wanted to hop in on that it is something that has come up several times about the translation of not only just the surveys and the questions themselves, but like, the interviews. So it's something that's in our mind. And I think that, yes, when we're getting more budget to make sure that the translations can, happen, and we're figuring out the process for that obviously we should definitely have as many translated languages as possible, because that's what would make it fair for everybody in the world to be able to like access these, especially within marginalized communities.
Yeah.
And besides that, I wanted to bounce back to Guillermo's question that for if you're having an evasive guest, you can always shift the question and try to find something that they are willing to talk about. You don't have to push them on one subject if that's, not going well for them. You can just find another subject that they're more willing to talk about. I had that a lot where people were like, well, I don't know about like what that person just said. And I'm just like, that's fine. Just tell me like, just from your perspective, like about, this, in some way, and then, or finding something that they can connect with more, that they're willing to explain more. In terms of aggressive, yes, I agree, Ivani, shut it down immediately. Nobody should be getting aggressive with you. Do not argue back with them. Just leave. Don't deal with it. There's some people who may become impassioned and may be very intense about their views, but not necessarily aggressive towards you, but just like very intense about how they feel. And that can come across as being aggressive towards you. Just if it happens that somebody's just being really intense and passionate about how they feel, just try to see that they're not trying to come at you, and they're just like, that is just the way of how they express. Some people don't really know how to express their their extreme views that they might have without being a bit intense about it. So just keep that in mind. But like, yeah, it should never come across as a transgression towards you. Yeah, that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you so much, Lulu. Thank you for that amazing feedback. So yeah, I'll just I think I just want to add that the whole essence of the interview is to get people's perspective. The whole essence of the interview is to get people's perspective and what they think, and not what we want them to say and any of that. So we are going to go straight up to the interview structure. Yeah, so the interview structure itself, right? When we have gotten consent, when we have preempted the interviewee about the interview, we've spoken to them, we've told them where we're coming from, we've told them what we represent, what the research is about, we've given them information sheets, they've gone through it a couple of days before time, right? And now they have given the consent to carry out the interview. So what are the kind of questions? How are we going to start? That's basically what this interview diamond is representing. How do we open up the interview after we've invited them over? We have comfortable place, we have some serene, some quiet, and we relax to carry out the interview. So how do we open the interview up? And how do we get the questions? What kind of questions are we getting? And how do we close the interview, right? So basically, I want to get feedback. How do we open the interview? What are the opening questions that we are going to ask our interviewers? So people will be carrying out this interview, right? Could you give us some suggestions, please? How do you kickstart the interview? Anybody?
Asking about the demographic information.
Okay. Anybody else?
Oh, maybe just introducing yourself, explaining what the information's about, what the questions are for, asking them how they are they comfortable?
Yeah.
Getting the consent and moving forward softly into the questions after making sure they're comfortable with why they're there, why we're asking the questions, what it's eventually going to be used for, and kind of letting them know that they're going to be giving us information or giving the interviewers information for something that's going to help kind of change things for the better with this technology, ideally.
Yeah, so basically, yeah, that's a very good feedback. Thank you so much. So yeah, basically you could start off with establishing with some rapport. So they are comfortable. You could ask them if it's the first time if it's the first time they're doing something like this, right? How do they feel about being a part of the interview? How much knowledge, try to probe how much knowledge do you know about, how much knowledge they have about the topic. And then when everybody's relaxed, right? Establishing rapport, also it's largely related to the person you are interviewing. So basically, we are the ones choosing the people we are interviewing. So we should know the persons we are interviewing, right? So after establishing rapport, making sure everyone is comfortable, then we could start off with one or two simple opening questions, right? About the research itself, about what the interview itself is about. So, yeah, anybody, can you think of any good opening questions we could have for the interview itself, right? The interview itself, the research questions itself. Any good opening questions?
When did you first hear about AI?
Yeah, good. That's very, very good, very good. When did you first hear about AI? When did you first interact with AI? What was your thoughts about AI? Any other person? Yeah.
And maybe even, have you ever interacted with AI?
Absolutely. Have you ever interacted with AI? How did you feel? What was your reaction? or did you have some expectations? Any other person? Any other
There's
person?
some good questions in the chat.
Um,
One is from Emmanuel. How do we identify our role in the interview process? And then someone else, Duke, had said, when you hear AI, what comes to mind?
okay. How do we identify our role in the interview process?
Yeah, I think I asked that question earlier. Yeah, I mean, people would like to know further. I mean, you go the interviewer from maybe you talk about the project, but there are some people who want to know what particularly you are doing regarding this interview. Yeah, just for the curious mind. I mean, is there a way to identify ourselves? Yeah, so that was a question I raised earlier. No, yeah.
Yes, you are part of the Singularity Network Ambassadors Program. And for this particular interview, an interviewer getting the data for the research. And the research is just about having people's thoughts, having people's perspective about AI, the ethical concerns people have concerning AI, and the expectation about future development. So that's your role. The first role here is that you're an interviewer representing the Singularity Net Ambassadors Programs, or from the Singularity Net Ambassadors Program. Fanny,
Okay.
are you good? Or
Yeah, I'm just kind of copying some of the comments, some of the questions in the chat into the slide. I'm not sure why it's not showing up on your screen. Maybe you need to refresh. I don't know.
okay.
Just a thought. I'm sitting here listening to this all talk, myself included. I know we default to referring to it as AI automatically, but for the purposes of this interview, do you think we should actually force ourselves to use just call it artificial intelligence to just be straightforward and clear about it?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, especially depending on the kind of persons or category of persons you're interviewing. But yes, using the full terminology, it's a great thing. If you could do some introductions, I know you could say, oh, moving forward, I'm going to be using AI, and this AI means artificial intelligence. If that's going to work, fine. If you can use the full terminology, absolutely.
On that one, I'd be inclined to follow their lead. It's like, yeah, start off with artificial intelligence, and if they are comfortable saying AI, you can echo that.
Yeah. Listen, are there any other questions? Trying to. Someone said free Zoom can do that. I know free Zoom would normally allow for 1 hour or 45 minutes. So if you're going to properly structure your questions for 30 minutes, then that should do per person, right? Except if you're doing a group interview, then you may want to consider using the paid version of Zoom. So do we have any other suggestions for a good opening questions? Because afterwards we'd be having a short 5 minutes break.
Just so you're opening up the possibility of doing one-on-one interviews and group interviews. Did I hear that correctly?
I didn't get you, sorry.
Did I hear that correctly that you're considering one-on-one interviews and group interviews? You can do either.
Yeah, for the people carrying out the interviews, right? The people who have filled the form, that they will be carrying out the interview for quarter 3. A couple of persons actually wrote that they are going to be doing some group interviews. So yeah, if you want to do group interviews, because I do know there are also opportunities for Q4. So if you're interested in doing group interviews, yeah. If you want to do one-on-one, yes.
All right, are we moving to a break then?
Yes, thank you, everyone. So I hope that we've been able to grasp or get some understanding on how to get consent, how to give informed consent, how to prepare for your recording, and then how to kickstart the interview. So we're just going to be going in for a short 5 minutes break. Then afterwards, Vani is going to take over from there. Thank you so much, everyone.
All
Thank
right,
you.
we'll be back at what, 8:08? Does that sound right?
Yeah, 8 minutes past the hour, looks like it.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, I'll see you in a minute.
Thank you.
All right, welcome back, everybody. I'm just going to screen share. And there we go.
Yeah.
All right, can everybody see the slides and hear me? Okay,
Yep.
good, good. All right, so now we're going to move on to having a little look at framing your questions as you get more into the heart of the interview. Some core principles I want to go through first. First of all, ask what you want to know. It sounds obvious, but new interviewers often talk around things a little bit too much. Sometimes it can be a fear of being too direct or not wanting to steer the interview too much, but you are the interviewer, so you do have a right to ask the question directly. So I just want a little bit of practice. Can somebody formulate a question that gets to the point? Let's go back to what we looked at before. One of these things that people shouted out in the last, before we had a break, you could use one of those. Let's take the question of, well, no, actually, let's not do that, because then it becomes really obvious because it's already written down. So, all right, let's say you want to know what the person's experience is of using, how they feel when they use AI. What's your question going to be? You could ask that in a lot of ways. I can see something in the chat. In an effort to understand your background, have you used AI tools? But if yes, what tools? If not, why? Right, now I'm going to come on to that in a minute. There's a reason why that wouldn't work very well as a question, but I'll get to that in a second. Has anybody else got any other suggestions of a question that gets to the point of how the interviewee feels about using AI?
How about just stating, do you like AI?
Oh, that's
Asking.
nice.
I was going to
That's
say.
really nice. Yeah. This is why I showed it. Would you vote for AGI for president?
Oh,
Seriously though, a sort of like jokey, contentious question like that can be quite a nice way to get cracking, as long as you're sure that the person gets it. If somebody's not very well informed and they maybe don't know what AGI even is, then that's not great. But you get me. Oh, hi, Sub-Zero. Nice to see you. Anybody
or
else
it could
got a
get
suggestion for getting to the point? All right, well, we'll leave that as something to think about then, but just do be aware that very often, even if you have your ideas of what you want to ask really clear, when you're actually in the interview situation, you can find that you're sort of talking around it and you're not getting to the point of what you want to ask. So it can help to even write it down. Let's move on. Oops. Be a bit wary of closed questions. That is, questions that can be answered with just yes or no. So in a way, Colleen, your one, do you like AI? Technically, that is a closed question. So a lot of interview technique guides will tell you not to ever, ever, ever use a closed question ever at all. I disagree. I think especially at the start of an interview, a couple of closed questions can be really helpful because they're easily answered. The person knows the answer to them quite often, and they can just, it helps you both settle down and feel comfortable. The other thing that's important, I think, is that if somebody has volunteered to be interviewed, they are very often, they're not going to just answer you with yes. If you say, do you like AI? And they're not just going to go, yes. They'll expand on it because they're there to be interviewed and they volunteered to and they're interested. So, yeah, it's not the disaster that you might think it is to use a closed question. So you can use them, especially at the start. Just don't overdo it. That's all. And as you get further into the interview, you'll be using fewer and fewer closed questions. I mean, in the middle of the interview, I would expect open questions, ones that are not just about yes or no. Now, this is the reason why the question that you said in the chat, the D phrase, might not work. Don't use a compound question, i.e. one question with several parts, like, what do you think of AI? Have you ever used it and when? Because an interviewee is going to go, sorry, what? What was the second bit? Oh, so basically split it up. Ask one thing at a time. That's a really good guideline. Whereas the closed questions things is you can use them sometimes. Compound questions for me are pretty much of a no-no. Other interviewers might disagree, but that's how I have found it works. And don't use leading questions. That is questions where you assume the answer, like things like, oh, I expect you think X, Y, Z, or oh, that must have made you feel ABC, or something like where you're assuming what the answer is going to be. Just avoid it because it's kind of rude. Now, I'm seeing there's quite a lot of things in the chat. Oh, yeah, what do you like about AI? Do you have any concerns? That's a really nice getting to the point question. Questions can be formulated in 3 categories to test awareness, acceptance, and adoption. I'm guessing, Duke, you can't come off mute because I'd really like to know a bit more about that. Or can you? And there's a nice comment in the chat from Esther that maybe you start with a closed question and follow up with an open one, as long as you're prepared to do that. Yeah, yeah. All right. Yeah, that point Duke is making in the chat, I'm not entirely following it, but I'd really like to know a bit more. So I don't know if you, oh, give me a sec. All right. Stick your hand up when you can, and I'll just move on. All right, so let's try framing some core questions for the middle section of your interview. Bear in mind, these are half-hour interviews. You really only need 3 or 4 core questions in mind. Maybe plus a couple of backups in case one of them doesn't fly. If the person's just like, oh, I don't want to answer that, or I don't know, or no. Yeah, it could be useful to have a couple of backups in mind. Note that this research project doesn't have any specific set questions that you must use. Some research projects decide to have a script, but this one is decided against that. So you can and should make it your own. And you can use what you know of your interviewee and their interests to help frame your questions to suit who you know they are and what you know they've got to say. Obviously, you can't always do that if you don't know them very well, but a lot of these Q3 interviews that we're doing are going to be with, friends, family, colleagues, people you know quite well. So let's have a go. I'm going to leave you to have a think for a minute or two, and then we're going to go round and I'm going to ask each of you in turn to suggest one core question that you might ask. These are not the introductory questions. These are when you've gone through all the preliminaries and you've done the warm-up questions. and you're in the heart of your interview, what might you ask? Oops. So PG, if you've got the slides open, if you can like take some notes in the slides.
Yes, I am on that. Yes, I'm on that.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
I'm doing that.
All right,
Yes,
I'm gonna leave people a minute to have a think, and then I'll go around. But yeah, I can see one in the chat from Clement, which is what scares you about AI, which I actually think is quite a good one. Right, Duke, you can speak now, please do.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. Can you confirm you can hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay, sorry, I had to move away from where I previously was because it was a bit noisy. Okay, so I said something about questions being categorized, formulated and categorized into three categories. One being to test awareness, the second being to test acceptance, and the third being to test adoption. And I pretty much said that, taking into consideration where I'm at, which is currently Africa, right? Knowing that you're going to interface with quite a number of people. There are those who are completely unaware of what artificial intelligence is, and probably have some biases against it, or just have misconceptions around it. So we'd like to test awareness to know what they know, and to also know the extent to what they know. And there are some who are aware but have not accepted it because of the biases that they have conceived about AI. For example, there are schools of thought down here that believe, and I think maybe globally, almost everywhere, that believe that artificial intelligence is going to, take over the world, take over human jobs and all of that. So some of those biases come in the way and prevent people from accepting artificial intelligence. And then there are some people who probably may have accepted it, but are just confined in certain spaces where they cannot use it, or they do not know how to use it, and that's where the adoption comes in, right? So this is more like an inbound or an in-house thing where we can have every interviewer, let's say an interviewer is going to be doing about 9 questions, call it 9 questions. The first 3 questions can be structured to test for awareness. The next 3 questions can be structured to test for acceptance, and the last 3 questions can be structured to test for adoption, right? And then
yeah, I see the point. However, I don't think that's necessarily applicable to every situation. And bear in mind that really a half-hour interview only needs about 3 or 4 main questions. I think it could end up being a bit long if you did that. I don't know. I wouldn't want every interviewer to have to follow that structure, but if it works for you, then yeah, definitely go for it. Yeah.
No, every interviewer doesn't need to. I mean, it's just probably like a guide document, because there are some people who you speak to and then they are aware, they have accepted and they have adopted it. So
Yeah,
you
sure,
wouldn't
I
need to go through that.
understand. But what I'm saying is that the way we're doing these interviews, we're not having all interviewers asking the same questions. So if that structure works for you, then brilliant. But I don't think it would work in every context.
Oh yeah, okay, that's cool. That's cool.
All right. So I can see quite a few nice ones in the chat. For some reason, they're not showing up when they're added to the slide, so it's a bit frustrating. But yeah. Has anybody? I'm going to go round actually and see. And if you can come off mute and speak, then please do. Clement, we've got yours in the chat. I'm assuming you can't come off mute, but we've got yours. Colleen, have you got a core question that you would ask?
Sure. I think one of mine would be, how do you feel developers are handling the progression of AI or artificial intelligence?
Ooh, that's nice. PG, have you got one?
Vani, I do think Colin's question is nice, but I
Yes,
mean,
yes, I'm getting.
it might sound a little bit advanced for some groups. I mean, if
Yes, it
someone,
might do, but we're just going round and we're just asking people what they think they would ask in the interview they're going to do. So we're not here to critique people's interviews. We're just interview questions. We're just here to see the range of things that people might ask. Guillermo, you've got a hand up. Oh,
Yeah, sorry. How's everyone? Good to see you guys. So just to share the experience we have at the ADN event.
sorry, can I interrupt you? We're just doing a little exercise now where we're going round and getting a question from each person. So would that be, can we go to your information after that?
Yeah.
All right. So PG, have you got one?
Okay. I would say what I'm particular about wanting to know what people think about ethics around ethics of AI. What do they think that that AI should not do or AI should do?
That's interesting. Yeah. Thank you. Advance Amayo, have you got one? I don't know
Yeah.
if you great, you can come off
Yeah.
mute. Excellent.
Yeah, so I think I'm actually picked this from yesterday. Lily was sharing something on digital systems rights, and I found it quite interesting. And I actually plan to interview at least one or two lawyers, yeah, with my interview. And one of the questions that I'm hoping to ask is, should AI systems be granted rights or to
Mm. Oh, you've cut off. But yeah, if should AI systems be granted rights is an interesting one. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Was that on mute? Oh,
Yeah, you went on mute
oh,
after.
okay. So I actually picked this from Lilu yesterday was talking about digital systems rights. Yeah, and I found it interesting. And because I have in plans to interview at least one or two lawyers, yeah, I realized that it would be a cool question to ask them within that
Yeah.
field, that AI system be granted rights or autonomy.
Yeah, interesting one. Andrew, can you come off mute? Have you got a question that you would use? Right, I'm taking that as a no. We'll go to Duke. I know you've given like that outline of like structures of how you would question, but have you got like a one-off question that you'd ask?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Not quite. I think predominantly over here, people are just concerned about AI taking over the world. So I'll frame a question and put in the chat.
Right. Oh. Effion, have you got one? Oh, something in the chat. Okay, I'll take. How about Essie? Is there a question you would ask? Nope. Esther?
Yeah, so I think the questions about like any concerns and fears, those are sort of the ones that you've provided before are sort of some of the core questions and will lead to plenty of discussion. And I think some of the others that we've had for the kind of pilot interviews was how do you see or how would you like AI to progress in the future? Because that's a sort of you know, what or you can even ask it in the wave a magic wand. If you were to wave a magic wand and you would have any kind of AI that you could have that you desired, what would that be like? And another variation on that is if you had $1 million to develop an AI product, what would it be? What would you put it toward?
That's interesting, yeah. Love, I can see you've got one in the chat. Is there anything, do you want to come off mute and say anything?
Nah, I think what I wrote in the chat is fine. Let me think of
Alright.
more.
Right, fair play. The phrase DeFi, have you got a question, a single question that you would use that you might think of using? I can see stuff in the chat that you're saying. We've got experience with AI, understanding, knowledge of specific tools, hopes, fears, specific instances of use, then culminate in an actual voice-to-voice conversation with GPT. That's quite interesting, yeah. I was wondering though, if you could give us how you would phrase a particular question. Thinking
I have
about the,
one now.
oh, go on.
Do you think AI should have a free will?
Should have a what?
A free will.
Oh, interesting.
Free will? Is that what you said? Free
Yeah.
will? Oh, yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's a question, do you think it does have or could have as well as should have?
Yeah.
That's well interesting. Yemi, have you got one? Right, I don't think he can come off mute. Essie's saying, do you think AI would dominate the human race in the near future? Interesting. Hands of anyone who has free will. And Lilu, have you got a question that you would use?
I honestly, when I have done these interviews, I did it a little bit more organically, where I started out with like one question that was like an opener, and then I listened to what what topics were being brought up and like their understanding, and then I would find like within what they say, I would find topics to like make questions about. So that's kind of like my style of how I do it. So I don't know if that's a good answer, but like, I might open it up with like, what do you have any current like fears about artificial intelligence, or do you have any current hesitance, or how do you feel about artificial intelligence? And then from there, I just like kind of pick up on the specific topics that they might drop onto me.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we're kind of coming on to that process of the follow-on question in a minute. But what I'm hearing from the examples that we've got is that there's quite a lot of questions about kind of people's fears and people's worries. And I think that is quite a valid thing to focus on. I guess make sure you're not leading, make sure you're not assuming that people have fears. I can see in the chat, what are Tuit thoughts on the human control? Oh, okay. What are thoughts on the human control over AI? Yeah, that's an interesting one too. All right. Well, thanks for those. I think I was just trying to get people thinking, and maybe you hear a question from somebody else that you wouldn't have thought of, and it just opens things up a little bit. But yeah, now we're going to have a little look at kind of what you were just talking about, Lilu, with follow-on questions. It's a really important interviewing skill. It's all about listening to and engaging with your interviewee, because obviously the more engaged you are with the interviewee, the richer the data is going to be. So when the interviewee gives you an answer, don't just go, yep, and move straight on. Listen to what they've said and see if there's a follow-on question that you can ask. New interviewers can be in too much of a rush to crack on to the next question, so they sometimes don't really listen, and that means they miss opportunities to really get to the heart of what the person is saying. Now, me and PG were going to do a demo of doing this, but looking at the time, I think we want to move on. And we were going to ask for a couple of volunteers to try it out. But what I'm going to instead ask you to do is, when we go into breakout rooms in a short while, try it out there. Listen to what your partner says and try to find a way to ask a follow-on question about what they've said. I can see a couple of things in the chat. I'm just going to check. Should corporations control AI versus decentralized? Might need some explanation about decentralization. Yep. How will AI educational opportunities affect your view of it in general? Yep, good one. Just wanted those on the recording. But yeah. All right, so clarifying questions. If you're not sure you understand what the person means, or even if you are sure yourself, but you think maybe a listener might not be sure, you can ask clarifying questions. These can be like probing questions, things like, I remember you spoke about such and such. Can you tell me more about that? Or you mentioned your concerns about blah, blah, blah. Could you tell me what you meant? Could you explain that a bit more? Or they can be reflecting questions, just checking your understanding. Things like, when you said blah, 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 I heard, and you tell them what you think they said. Have I got that right? Or did you mean blah, blah, blah? So these can be really important to just make sure that you're not going off on a tangent because you've misunderstood what they meant. It can help if in the initial part of the interview you take a few notes with a pen and paper, just so that you can come back to things later and clarify them, rather than interrupting your interviewee in mid-flow to ask them to clarify. So that's just a useful skill, and I'm going to ask you to try that out when we do some practice in a little few minutes. Right. The last thing I want to raise is the problem of what I call the mates interview. It's really great to interview somebody that you know really well, and the rapport thing is already sorted in most cases if you're interviewing your mum. But, if you probably will know what to ask her better than you would with a stranger. However, there is an issue that sometimes arises when you're interviewing a friend. You've got to remember that the interviews we're doing are intended to be heard by people who don't know either of you. So just be a bit wary of shared references or in-jokes that others won't understand. It can be so easy to get that. It might feel a bit weird, but if your interviewee refers to something like, oh, it's like that time we went to London, innit? Just ask them to explain. You can even say, just for the recording, because of listeners won't know about what happened. Can you explain that? But just don't let it go with references that are personal to the two of you and that haven't been elucidated a little bit. I can see things in chat. Yeah, there's stuff about reformulating questions about free will. Yeah, great stuff. All right.
Actually, that was a reference to the comment about either or questions.
Yes.
So either or questions can be reformulated as to what extent.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah. Because it doesn't assume. Yeah. Right, so now we're going to practice. We're going to go into breakout rooms in pairs, and you'll spend 3 minutes each way interviewing each other. Remember to swap after 3 minutes. I think I've set it so that I can broadcast a message, but I might not have done. So do try to keep an eye on the time and swap after 3 minutes. Imagine that you've already done the introductory stuff and you're in the heart of your interview. Maybe think about some of the possible questions we were just talking about, and put into practice all that you've learned about how to frame a good question, how to make a follow-on question, how to clarify, and all that. And then we'll come back into this main room and feedback about how it felt. I can see a couple of little things in chat just to make sure. All right, Esther, nice to see you. Thanks. And love, you're going to run as well. All right, cool. Right, so I'm just going to unshare for a minute. And I'm going to open some breakout rooms. Now, how many are we? If Love's hopping off and Esther's hopping off, we're one.
Oh, my Vanessa.
Hi, everyone. You're all back. Lovely. What I'm going to do is just gather a little bit of feedback from how that went, and then I'm going to go to you, Guillermo, with the point that you were going to make about how interviewing was for you. Let me just share screen. All right, so how did it feel? Has anybody got anything that they would like to add or comment on? I saw we had a bit of room hopping going on. So did everybody get a chance to try out interviewing someone?
Yes,
Yeah.
and I would pay
Go ahead.
attention. I'm sorry, to see if I could find that follow-up question while they were talking. And it was kind of difficult to do that, but I did end up coming up with some kind of a follow-up question to what was being said. So I was happy about that part. Then I got to practice that.
Nice one. Duke, you've got a hand up.
Yeah. So it was great in my room. It was good. However, I spotted a problem that I thought to mention in the general room so that we can probably prepare for it or prepare to avert it in the case. So my partner in my room wasn't able to, I mean, he was in a noisy place, so couldn't turn on his mic. And so I had to talk while he had to text. And that lacuna existed. And so there was a lot of time spent waiting for the text to come in and all that. So just as a contribution, that if we are doing for those who for those interviewing, right, you may want to check in whether the interviewee is really comfortable with the day and comfortable with the time and has everything in check on their end, so we don't get to also experience a situation where an interviewee is probably unable to respond, as adventure.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, a lot of us have unstable internet connections. I think, if something happens, you might have to think about rescheduling. Another thing you could do, though, is that the GEI has also got a survey form. So if you get to the stage where, look, we're not going to be able to find a time to do an interview, it's all gone to pot or whatever, you could just say, look, would you rather just do it via an interview, via a survey form? But yeah, I think it's really important to check that they really can do a voice interview if you're doing it over Zoom. The phrase DeFi, you've got a hand up too.
Oh yeah, I was just talking about the interviews we just went through. PG kind of asked me a great question about whether I thought it should be used in professional life, why, and based it on different locations you might be in, because people in different areas of the world might think, yes, you should use AI for personal, some might not, and why or how.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. And how about when you were asking questions? Did you come up with anything you hadn't expected or?
We kind of ran into a time issue, but I had asked her about well, yes, actually. I asked her, would she want her children to use AI? And she said absolutely, but she went further, not only being on the consumer side of it, she wanted her children to be trained in it, to be a creator, which I took as her wanting her children to be trained in taking control of their world using AI to better everything.
Oh, excellent. Has anybody else got any feedback on how the interviewing process went? How you found it? Any sticking points or anything you thought, oh, I didn't really know how to. Okay, I'm going to take that as a otherwise everything was good. But what I will say is we said before that we will make a little Discord group for everybody who's working on interviews or anyone who's interested. And I kind of think these things get easier the more you practice. So if you feel at all nervous or a bit, oh, I don't know really, maybe find somebody else in the group and just go, can we have a little practice? Could we jump on a Zoom call and just have a go and kind of try to get used to those follow-on questions and those clarifying questions and just feel a bit more confident. But if you're finding it's going well already, then you probably won't need to. The last thing we want to talk about is what to do afterwards. But before we do that, Guillermo, I realised that I cut you off when we were trying. I was just really concerned about the time. So I'd love to hear about your experience of interviewing in that event in Argentina.
Yeah, but no worries at all. I was having connection problems, so I wasn't able to follow up. And you're right, time constraint is always good to have in mind when you're doing an interview. I'm not an interviewer at all. I do have some experience on building and creating content. Well, nothing pre-production, and again, as a developer, when we went to the ADN, we wanted to have some actions, as I represented the Singularity Net and the Ambassador Program. So we all agree that video is a great format today. So, and we didn't have not only this inputs or information you guys are sharing or education on how to do it properly, but we have a challenge to onboard people, a lot of people in a big room. Okay, so how we organize that? So maybe it's have something in coherence with what Duke was saying. We did something that was pre-produced, so we have all these questions, some kind of what we did with the fish pond on Panama. We repeat the 5 same questions to everyone, and that brought us a wide scope of the same concept through different eyes or knowledge, and that gives a mix of a context. Of course, it's not the point of this workshop, but probably, yeah, it brought great results, and we're going to keep sharing. But it's funny. It was funny until today to listen to different responses about the same topic. It's like asking somebody about the opener. We like, would you vote for AGI for president? Because that will bring all of the, as you mentioned, a concept, people's knowledge of the content of the subject, fears. It's just a way to bring follow-up questions. But no, thank you for the invite. I really enjoyed this one and learned.
Yeah, that is, I mean, it is an interesting approach to have the same questions always. But I think particularly because of the kind of interviews we're doing, which are very much with people that, well, not all of them, but most of them are with people that we know. And I think, like we were saying before, you've got that rapport and you kind of know something about them. So maybe you can frame questions that are, I think if you're at an event, it can be useful to ask the same question as you did. But if it's more of a personal connection, I think you might get more out of it if you are formulating questions yourself. I mean, if we do form a little Discord group, we might kind of swap ideas on questions and we might kind of align a little bit. And maybe this training session as well has given people ideas and they'll kind of go in the same directions. But I wouldn't want to restrict somebody too much to saying, oh, you've got to ask these 5 questions. However, if people find that they would find it useful, we can thrash it out between us and come up with a kind of framework. I think it would be better for people to kind of work it out for themselves according to who they're interviewing, but let's see how we go. Thanks very much for that. All right, to wrap up, because we've only got like 5 minutes, well, a couple of minutes actually, it's less than I thought. I want to run through really quickly what you do afterwards. So after your interview, download and save your audio file as soon as you can, and ideally to the cloud, not locally, to avoid any data loss disasters. Let's assume that you're doing it on Zoom, you will download it. and you can save it to a folder in your G Drive or something. You can do the same with the audio recording off your phone. But yeah, don't save it locally just in case, and don't leave it sitting on whatever you've recorded it on, whether it was your phone or your laptop. I mean, that's actually something we should have said. We were assuming that people would mostly record audio on their phones, but you might do it on a tablet, you might do it on something else, but just get it off there as soon as you can and save it to the cloud. Then you're going to name your file, and we have to check with Esther at some point exactly what the file naming convention is going to be. But it's probably going to include the date and the identifier code that we talked about before. You'll be given a location somewhere on the GEI's Google Drive to move it to once you've named it and it's all ready. We're going to have to think a little bit about that, because obviously if we give everybody access to the same folder, then people can see each other's interviews, and that could be a data protection issue. So we'll just have to think about exactly how we do that. But again, we'll talk about that in our little Discord chat group. And then I'm going to create issues for everybody's interviews on the AI Ethics GitHub board. So update your issue, use the identifier code number and the duration of your interview, like however many minutes it is. You can also note in there if there were any problems, if you've got any ideas for improvements, anything you've learnt. It'd be great to have that updated in the board. So for future questions, we will make that Discord group for those who plan to be doing interviews, and others are welcome too. So please just, before you go, stick your name in the chat if you'd like to be in it. But that's about it. Thanks very much for coming.